the people who are actually who join. So thanks for joining this webinar. I just want to make sure to start on time. This webinar that today is all about the sanitary challenges in plastics stewardship. In times when we need to navigate conflicting objectives of preserving lives and people and boosting circularity at the same time. And as a way to explore those topics, I want to just spend 1 minute to walk through some of the online meeting instructions, which are important for everyone to make the most of this time. First, you're registered and you're free to use your name or in whatever nickname you want, but I guess better for everyone to know who you are. By the way, particularly through LinkedIn, you can have access to the full list of people who registered and to take part in this meeting. So that's probably a good way for each of you to know who are the other participants of this webinar. You are by default in mute mode. This is a way to ensure and maximize the quality of the discussion. We don't need your camera, so we keep it off. It's a way to maintain the bandwidth and minimize your carbon footprint attending this event. And of course, if you find this discussion interesting, you are very welcome to invite other participants, either through LinkedIn or through the functions provided in Zoom. If you want to walk through social media and share some comments about this event, you can feel free. And if you tag @Ksapa.org, we make sure that everyone has what to use to keep track with the discussion that is underway. And the last comment is basically that at some point during the discussion, we will activate a poll. It's a very short poll, 3 questions. It takes maximum 20 seconds, and that's helpful for us to improve as necessary and connect together on specific issues if you find it interesting. So let's move on for the discussion that we have today. It's a brief introduction about what we are and why we are leading this discussion on circularity and sanitary challenges at Ksapa.org. And we'll move to a few information to provide some context around the issue. And then that's the core of the discussion. We'll make the most of the valuable interveners we have sharing their views and their expertise with us. Namely, we'll have David Croft, Heija, and Mario Heija. So, very brief introduction. Ksapa.org is founded as an organization to address what we call the decade of turbulence. A few months ago, we would have called the decade of delivery, as we're indeed a huge sanitary global crisis. It is fair to say that we can talk about a decade of turbulence. In the middle of that decade of turbulence, we know that we have to manage conflicting objectives. Sanitary crisis generates, at the same time, recession that might call for savings. And at the same time, we know that the global goals are calling for investments in climate, in circularity, in people. So we've created Ksapa.org as an organization to help particularly businesses and investors to innovate, accelerate, and contribute to global goals the best they can. We do that through 3 activities of consulting to identify the priority areas where we can accelerate and innovate. We have a pillar of investment when we federate investors to accelerate funds, enabling shifts. And we advocate. Typically, this kind of webinar is an excellent opportunity for us to share what we know, get a chance for people to talk and share their expertise and enable other organizations to move faster on those complex issues of sustainability. We operate with a team that is headquartered in Paris and with a network across the globe of 150 plus experts, as well as additional partnerships and strategic organizations working with us. Typically, when we work on circularity and agriculture, we involve agronomists. When we work on circularity and data, we work with data scientists. That's just random examples of the kind of network. The idea for us is really to ensure that there is good combination of expertise to provide very targeted support. as part of our advocacy programs, we lead the production of reports, which can be funded by grants and foundations. You have some illustrative blog articles you can access on open source manner on the publication section of Ksapa.org. And we produce regular webinars. Today we're talking about circularity and sanitary challenges. And later in the month, there will be another webinar engaging conversation on the upcoming European Union initiative on due diligence and human rights for 2021, where there are actually already 150 plus registered participants, so you're welcome to join as well. So let's focus a little bit on the circularity and the context. At the end of the day, the way we think we can engage that conversation on circularity and sanitary challenges is very simple. We think that the discussion, of course, is complex, and we released at the beginning of the year a report called Towards 2030, where we identified 6 priority areas for the decade, including circularity. So we strongly believe, as much as a broad committee of all of the people attending this call, for example, that circularity is very, very important and needed. However, because it's challenging, it is not making the progresses that are needed. At the end of the day, the challenge we have today in the middle of the sanitary crisis is, in simple terms, the fact that we have conflicting objectives. On the one hand, the sanitary dilemma are exacerbating the challenges of circularity, simply because the single-use solution can be a good solution to protect health of people. And at the same time, we know that we need to bolster circularity. So how to do that? At least in the middle, what we know from a pure economic perspective, and we're talking about that just with a client yesterday in the hotel segment. Now they need to use disposable elements for bedrooms, and that implies that staff need to work twice longer, which is a big cost for the company. So they don't really know how to manage that. But it's a very practical and concrete example of how they know that they're in a conflicting situation to adapt hotel management to sanitary challenges, and at the same time they know that it's at a cost that they cannot afford on the long range. So clearly there is something here that has to be managed in a very smart manner. And in response to that, of course, businesses and investors have to manage with controversies and are under strong pressure. And we've just shared here a few examples. And at the end of the day, we believe at Ksapa.org that the only one way forward is basically to maintain a clear direction and to identify the right way to, of course, demonstrate agility and adapt to the sanitary challenges, and at the same time build trust over time, being credible with commitments which have been made and maintain a direction over time to deliver on the decade on circularity, as much as on other topics. So that implies also, when this is what's outlined here, that for businesses and investors, sanitary challenges on circularity brings even more complexity. And here you have the example of the conflicting regulations you can find between what's going on mostly in Europe and in the US, where on the one hand, there is the ban for single-use plastics that is underway, and on the other hand, there are examples where, at the end of the day, some regulations are diminishing in impact. So when you look at that from a business perspective, that shows poor stability in terms of a regulatory framework to define and make decisions accordingly on security. There is no other solution than make the business case and maintain a credible trajectory, we believe. And this is the last section which we wanted to share in introduction. Those questions of circularity, we believe, are going to gain in importance for the years to come, because they're moving or shifting from a perspective of acceptability from an environmental standpoint to an acceptability and even legal issues that are growing in importance from not only an environmental standpoint, but also a human rights standpoint. We can see, and that'll be part of the discussion of the webinar that will be led on the 30th of June, that the discussions and the way of the European Union, for example, include human rights scope of vigilance that expand to some environmental issues, and it's likely that circularity and some of the implications of some pollutions will be part of that. So there we go. And in response to those complex issues, at least at Ksapa, we are promoting actively three things that will close this introduction. First, we encourage businesses and investors to choose the right battles. We know that the questions of single use, of plastics, and of circularities are extremely complex. So we believe that at the end of the day, there are reasons, there are issues, part of the sanitary challenges, which explain why some single-use solutions might make sense, but some others do not. So in that sense, it's all about choosing the right battle and being strong on those to explain, educate stakeholders, but at the same time, demonstrate capacity to innovate and substitute on others. So for those kind of activities, we do lead stakeholder engagement activities, for example, to really identify and clarify that. The second aspect is the investment in innovative models and innovative solutions. We do promote solutions driven by digital solutions and innovative financial solutions. There are, of course, plenty of other ways to innovate. And at the end of the day, our point is just to look forward in a way where we can approach the concept of circularity with different modes than what has been done to date. Learn from what's been successful, what's been a failure, but at the end of the day, demonstrate to stakeholders that there are ways to accelerate, increase the impact through innovation. That's at the end of the day what we believe can build trust. So we design ourselves some impact investment model structuration in that sense, accelerating impact investors to accelerate the way companies and suppliers can invest in circularity systems. And last, there is this question of collaborations. We know that those topics are complex and require shared ownership, shared contributions. So a question we have and where we work is basically how to ensure that collaborative initiatives can strategize their activities together and be more to the point, to focus resources where collaborative work can really have a meaningful impact between what we can observe today in 2020 and what is needed, let's say, in 2025, 2030. So I will just close on those elements for those introductory elements and make sure that we keep 45 minutes for the group discussion with our panelists. I need here to introduce to our three panelists who've accepted to join and take part in this interesting conversation. Maria Utters, Group SVP, Sustainability and Corporate Responsibility at Sodexo. And I would like Maria to take a minute and introduce to Sodexo for everyone to know.
Thank you. Do you hear me properly? Yes.
Very good.
Very good. Thank you. So hello to everyone, and thank you for having me on the agenda. So my name is Maria Utters, and yes, I do work for Sodexo at group level in charge of the agenda on corporate and social responsibility to ensure we continue to be a leader in sustainability. I took this role 5 months ago only, in January 2020, and believe me, the beginning has been quite hectic in this pandemic. But after 13 years with Sodexo in different roles in HR, in strategy, and in marketing before, and I would say that it's one of the traits of Sodexo is to encourage people to grow within the organization in different roles. A few words about Sodexo as we start. You probably know, or maybe you know a little bit of Sodexo, quite a large international company. I'll use 2019 figures because, again, the 2020 would be different figures, but we used to be a 22 billion euros revenue company, serving mostly B2B clients that range from hospitals, corporations, schools, universities, senior homes. And we do different types of service. A big chunk of our service is revenues in food service, about 60%, and we cater close to 100 million consumers every day. We also do facilities management, in which cleaning, energy, or waste support to our clients are our main activities. A few things about Sodexo that I think you should know as we start this conversation. First is that Sodexo was born in 1966, so 50 plus years, and we were already born with a mission. Since our birth, it's written in our DNA. We have the ambition of impacting in a positive way the communities and the environment in which we operate. And believe me, back then in 1966, we were totally a pioneer in this formulation of a mission for the company. Since 2008, we have formalized our sustainability roadmap. We call it the Better Tomorrow, making a better tomorrow for everyone. It's our roadmap on sustainability, and it encapsulates all our objectives and commitments. Maybe, Farid, you can help me with one slide to just maybe show better what I'm referring to. Thank you very much. So think about this matrix with 3 columns and 3 lines. On the horizontal axis, we like to remember every type of impact we can have. First, at the very granular level about individuals, second about communities, and third about the planet and the environment. And on the horizontal lines, you'll see that we have 3 roles. First, as an employer, and we have about 450,000 employees, 500,000. So it's a first priority for Sodexo. We're a people company. Second, it's about being a service provider, catering to 35,000 clients or so and 100 million consumers. So very important to establish everything and our commitments as a service provider. And third, as a corporate citizen, as we operate in 60 countries or so. And so those 3 times 3 makes 9 commitments. And all those commitments have very clear targets for the 2025 horizon. And so maybe I'll just share with with all of you, the next slide, saying that Sodexo, and I like very much what you said, Farid, we have chosen our battles, and we have made a few clear environmental commitments, like reducing food waste by 50%, reducing carbon emissions by 34% in line with a 1.5-degree trajectory, and transitioning to 100% green energies for all our premises, all that for 2025. And we're measuring and reporting all this with audited figures. So we'll come into more details about those commitments in general, about waste, plastic, food waste, and so on. But I hope this gives you a little bit of a vision of what Sodexo is doing and where are our big challenges and issues. Thank you, Farid.
Thank you very much. Let me introduce David Croft as well, who can introduce himself as much as Reckitt Benckiser.
Thanks, Farid, and good afternoon, everybody. So I'm David Croft. I look after sustainability for Reckitt Benckiser, RB. RB, you may not have heard of Reckitt Benckiser too much, but I'm pretty certain you'll have heard of some of our brands that exist and are sold in about 190 countries around the world. And in Western Europe, often you'll see brands like Dettol or Lice or Cillit, Bang or Mortein, Finish, Strepsils, Nurofen, Durex, Skoll, a whole range of global brands that are bought by around about 20 million consumers a day around the world. RB, in its earliest guise, has been around for just around 200 years. We began as a small company in the northeast of the UK, out of the era of the philanthropists of the time, aligned to people like the Cadbury brothers, Terry brothers of York, the Lever brothers, who went on to set up Unilever, of course, and a host of others that were operating in that time. And then merging with Benckiser, we became this global business that I've just been describing. But those values at the heart of that business set up by James Reckitt way back in about 1820 still hold true today, and they fit to the purpose that we describe for ourselves in our new business strategy much more clearly. And that purpose is really about to protect, heal, and nurture in what we describe as the relentless pursuit of a cleaner, healthier world. And whether that's about climate change, plastics, or hygiene products and health products. It's all about trying to make access to the best quality hygiene, wellness, and nutrition and nourishment an absolute right for everybody, not just a privilege for some. And that's what is all about our new business approach, our strategy going forward, and led by a new CEO who joined us just last year. And we've been really energizing a lot of activity around our brands on this agenda. Now, whether we're going to talk more about plastics today and this whole circular economy conversation, and that's certainly part of it with work we've been doing over a number of years. And we do have a lot of plastic packaging. So this is something that's very close to our hearts about how we make that better for the future, better for the long term, better for the planet, and yet still maintain the accessibility for those 20 million consumers around the world. But it's also part of what we're thinking about in a much broader sustainability agenda, whether that's around climate change. And only the other week, we confirmed our commitment to delivering our part of maintaining global warming to less than 1.5 degrees by 2030, which for us in the short term by 2030 is a 65% absolute carbon reduction, 100% renewable electricity, and then progressively towards an ambition of carbon neutral by 2040. And you may have seen a partnership announced today with Amazon, one of our biggest customers globally, where we're working with them on their climate pledge to help that come to pass as well. And what we see going forward is the need for much of the sustainability conversation to be driven, as Fareed was saying, about collaboration. And it's something we'll talk more about as we go through this session, I'm sure. But we certainly see collaboration throughout the value chain, upstream with suppliers, raw material producers, but also downstream, and considering, if you like, a circularity model about how we join up through collaborations to create a more an approach that is more delivering on circularity than is often the case these days. But without getting into the nitty-gritty of what we're going to talk about for the next 35 minutes, I'll hand back to Fareed.
Thank you very much for this introduction. I want also Heija to introduce yourself as much as Stora Enso, because then people taking part in this webinar will also get a flavor of the chain that is part of that conversation, talking about potential collaboration. So I find it interesting. Heija.
Thank you so much, Fareed. And yes, so this is Heija Heitavuo sitting in my home office here in Helsinki. And as you alluded, so I represent a company called Stora Enso. And yeah, I'm fully aware that not very many people probably know Stora Enso very well, because we are a bit of an invisible company, even though that we're one of the kind of largest packaging material and packaging companies in the world. So we are basically a 10 billion euro company operating in Europe, Asia, Middle East, Africa, as well as Latin America, and basically what we do is we manufacture different type of bioproducts. Traditionally, we used to do a lot of pulp, but nowadays we derive different types of chemicals, even medical products out of trees. We produce packaging materials, other forest products. And maybe the curiosity item about the company is that I recognize that the other companies are also very mature companies, but we're actually the oldest existing corporation in the world, or the oldest limited liability company, because we were founded in 1288 in Sweden. So we've merged from a Swedish company called Stora Kopparberg, which is the world's first copper company, copper mine, but also an actual company, and then Enso Goodside, which was a Finnish company. And as said, so we do anything that you can from a tree, and that's our motto as well. So what we say is that everything that is made of fossil materials today can be made of trees tomorrow, and I think that kind of sets the agenda for us. We're also a major forest owner, one of the largest in Europe. So that the kind of responsibly managed trees and forests, they are the kind of foundation of what we do. We have an extremely strong sustainability agenda, which is, of course, we're part of the solution to climate change. That's how we see. But also when it comes to circularity, we, of course, as the bio-based materials company, we have the ecological circularity in terms of which is the renewability, how raw materials they grow back, and then we have the product technical circularity, which we endorse and work. And as materials for our products, we use both fresh fibers as well as recycled fibers. So we kind of bring that together. And myself, I am the divisional head of sustainability. So I represent the packaging materials division of Stora Enso, which is a 4 billion business, and whereby we do different kind of consumer packaging materials as well as container boards. And we have another division which also does corrugated board and form fiber. So we basically do as a company anything that you can do in terms of fiber-based packaging as well as wood packaging, and so we offer primary, secondary, and tertiary packaging opportunities. And of course, in this context, the discussion about plastics and alternatives and all that is, of course, very interesting. So looking forward to fruitful discussions today.
Excellent, thanks. So yeah, so moving on, let's explore point number one, battles that need to be chosen. Either, I'd say, because I think it's very important for that discussion to be nuanced, areas where there are good reasons to believe that plastics are to be accepted and needed could be one battle that you find really important to push forward, and or can also explore the alternative approach to see areas where you've come to the conclusion that at the end of the day, alternative solutions are needed, notably to manage basically that, to solve that equation between, I would say, sanitary challenges, circularity needs, and at the same time, making the case from a business perspective, because at some point, I gave this example from those hotel chains exploring substitutes simply because single use just as a cost which does not meet with the way they can operate to manage the hotels. So that's a very concrete example where that's actually why they're exploring alternative solutions more than the circularity program at the end of the day. So Maria, maybe you want to give some thoughts around that. You started to briefly introduce to food waste. Maybe is that where you want to start from?
Yes, thank you, Fahid. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it connects with Sodexo very much. The notion of circularity, we've been taking it, and again, I alluded to a few of our targets to measure and to reduce food waste being the big one. But of course, we have also made a few commitments on eliminating all the other organic waste to landfill and have no recyclables to landfill by 2025. And that's where I'll come to the topic of plastics and other materials. So just before talking about plastic, I really want to take just 1 minute to share with you our number one priority in terms of circularity, which is preventing food loss. I don't know if all of you know, but it's a fact today that about 30% of all the food production in the world, and it occurs all along the value chain now, from the farms, the fields, the distribution chain, the kitchens, and last in the consumer plate, 30% is lost. So it means that it's 1.3 billion tons of food that is wasted every year, and it could feed 3 billion people a year. So I think that's what we've taken as a moral scandal and the real opportunity for us to set a target of reducing the 50% of our average annual 117,000 tons of food that are wasted every year within Sodexo for many good and bad reasons. We want to tackle and address this, and you can do it by setting a target, deploying measurement tools on the site, and educating our teams and our consumers towards that. So I really could not keep this message about food waste and the opportunity that we have here. Coming now to all the other materials that are involved in our type of services. We have, of course, and we have in our cafeterias, and I hope some of you have been served by a Sodexo team and with a good experience. But we have the plastic bottles, the aluminum cans, we have cutleries, we have many things that exist, we call the disposables, that are either from Sodexo or that come from our suppliers that will be on a site. The first thing that we have always said before COVID or after COVID, it's prevention. And we can do a lot in terms of educating. If I start from food, of course, if we adapt better the portion sizing, it's one very good way of reducing at the end the waste. But for all the rest, it's really about adopting first a by request only. For bags, for cutlery. When we acquired, for example, Food Chéri, a food delivery company in France, one of the first things we've made was to change the cutlery to make it only on demand. And that's already by first reducing the usage and the need upfront. Promoting bulk condiments or bulk buffets with yogurts or salads, and to avoid all the small plastic containers is one way of really first doing prevention. So I think it's one of the very first objectives. And we started way before COVID to be working on plastic-free sites, plastic-free dining locations. And we can push those efforts through the collaboration of some of our clients, like Unilever, Telefonica, or public accounts like the Comité des Régions in Brussels, where the client and us have agreed to go for 100% free plastic sites and to eliminate plastics, aluminum, even cardboard cups and so on. So today Sodexo has eliminated a few things. So there was the bad plastic, as you mentioned, Farid. And so for plastic straws, for stirrers in your coffee, for plastic bags to take away your food, all that is gone. And we're not going to go backwards. Then there is a few places where it's true that for very clear sanitary reasons, and we'll see the surge of much more plastic boxes or paper card boxes with plastic tops, and plastic sealing on a lot of the food, where the consumers now have a fear. And while we don't have enough knowledge from COVID about where's the transmission, where's the virus, and so on, we will accept and we will know that we have to accept again plastic. We're not going to replace the old plastic bottles that have been replaced with water fountains. There's no need to go backwards on this, but on a few places we acknowledge that plastic is going to have a little bit of a surge, and we need to accept this. I will take probably a very controversial word on this. I would say that I will not be able, and within Sodexo we know that we will accept for sanitary good reasons some plastic to come back. But I see it as well as an opportunity for pushing on another battle. I cannot offset all the harm that we will be doing again to oceans and to the planet by pulling all this plastic into the water. But we can do things like first pushing another battle that has a very good impact on the environment and climate, which is pushing for more plant-based diets and less meat. And the carbon emissions that we get from significantly reducing meat is not offset at all by the surge of plastic. And of course, we need to work on all the recycling with the collection of plastic. And we've been pulling together policies for all our countries, but it really depends on legislation and even just the sites themselves, depending on the client, if it's a hospital or a school, how's the configuration of the place, how can we improve collection of the plastic that will be happening. So maybe a long answer, but to say some of it we have eliminated, we don't go backwards. Some of it we'll have to accept it, and we can work, of course, and we'll discuss more about that, about how to replace this with less harmful materials, still how to be productive. But I will say we'll also push for another battle that has also a very good impact on planet, which is more plant-based versus less meat-based diets. I hope it's not too controversial. I'm not giving up on plastic, but I really wanted to say also this message, because there is a logic of offsetting and trading off here the impacts?
There are trade-offs, and it's all connected. So it's all connected at the end of the day. Just curious, moving to David, to explore also as part of the battles that you've selected, Maria, the concept of making solutions accepted and affordable for consumers. Because when David introduced himself and his work, he mentioned that aspect, which I believe is actually also important. Especially if we say that we're in the middle of a crisis, at the end of the day, affordability remains also something important, building solutions. So, David, battles.
Yeah, thanks, Farid. I mean, listen, I think we can talk about this in the context of total material use. We can focus on the stuff that is always front of mind when we talk about circular economy in terms of product design and packaging design, especially. I think I think there's a real sense that we need to think more broadly than just the packaging, but I know we're going to focus a little bit on that today because that's where some of those points about affordability, and particularly in the case of some of the products we deal with in terms of the health side of the business, the necessity for product integrity and consumer confidence around product integrity is absolutely critical, and plastic is a good material for that. That doesn't mean to say it can't improve. We can't design things better, and we can't use more recycled materials to help drive towards that circularity perspective. But it is beyond packaging as well, because we're looking at things like raw material input in terms of recycled feedstocks that we can use for ingredients in products, both chemical ingredients, as well as also the sort of more natural ingredients that we use, for example, from natural materials like latex or dairy and things like that. So we have to think about everything fitting together in that context of circularity. And I do think, just at the outset, I think it's really difficult for many businesses that were set up based upon a linear economy model to now redefine how they work. And that's why I started this conversation with the point about collaboration, to help use that collaboration to see how you can fill in the remaining arcs of the circle to talk to circularity, because I think it's going to be challenging. It is challenging for one organization to do that on its own. It doesn't mean to say that we can't enable it, both through how we design products, how we use ingredients, how we use materials, how we connect with consumers, how we understand consumer use of products, and how they will then be used and disposed of to work towards that model of circularity. But I think we have to work in collaboration with others to do that. If I think specifically about packaging, however, I think there are five facts that we've really borne in mind as we look at how we leverage a higher level of activity and ambition towards the circular economy associated with packaging. I think first and foremost, business as usual is not acceptable. It's going to be worse than we thought in the future in terms of the scale of plastic production doubling over the next 20 years or so, leading to significantly, perhaps 3 times as high a plastic flow to oceans, and that plastic stock in the oceans quadrupling. Massive implications for ecosystems, communities, and businesses. And as a result, I think we've all got to up our ambition level about how we design products, how we select materials, how we consider what happens before we process those materials and after they leave us and are used and then disposed of, to help contribute towards closing the arc of the circle. And if we don't, then very clearly regulatory changes are going to drive significant changes in policy environment that we'll be exposed to. We're seeing this all over the world. You guys are just as aware of it as I am, but more than 90 EPR policies on plastic packaging, for example, that we're tackling. And when, as RB does, you work in 190 countries around the world, you get to see these things very quickly. And also, I think fundamentally, we can't just recycle our way out of this problem. Whilst we can design and use more recycled material and enable that design for recycling, recycling on its own will not solve the issue. And that's why I think we've also got to look at how we create much more innovative design And to your point, Farid, where we do that is going to be determined by the nature of the product, the nature of the use, the nature of the channel to the consumer even, and how we can rethink some of those issues to take plastic, as the example, out of the mix. And so now we've got 4 real themes around how we do this. First and foremost, how do we get plastic free? How do we substitute alternatives? And that might be alternative materials. It might be completely different designs. Then there's clearly an opportunity for less plastic, and that's just efficiency. And that is also around product efficiency and design to optimize pack size to consumer use or consumer dose. The more optimal we can make that ratio, the better in terms of the material use that goes into packaging, and then we optimize the material itself. I think there's a massive opportunity in what we call the reuse revolution, where we enable through refills, through concentrates, through different approaches to reaching consumer, reuse of a primary packaging that can go on and on and on. And for those of you of my age, you know that's what we always used to do. I remember going into supermarkets as a child and you filled up your pot of coffee beans, until now we're used to buying it in one fell swoop and ground and everything. I think those days will return. They won't return at scale because we have a different model from an economy point of view, but they will return to a degree. And enabling consumers to reuse in different ways will be part of that equation. And then last but by no means least, we've got to use better materials, better plastics, obviously. And that's where we can look at different adoption of PCR, but also just bioplastics and different ways forward. And to your point about picking battles, Farid, for me, it's about picking the product mix and the market mix to create access to the optimal design, the optimal packaging material in the optimal ratios, if you like, of packaging to product for the consumer, for the marketplace that they're in. And that will vary in different parts of the world. And it will also vary depending on what can be recycled. We've got to be realistic that whilst certain materials in theory can be recycled, we know in practice they're not recycled in many parts of the world. And we need to be realistic about what we can do and how we do that. And so that's where we pick the battles of where to work differently as well. But we'll talk more about collaboration and recycling opportunities, I think, in the not too distant. So, Farid, back to you, and I'll let you carry on.
Yes, we will just in a few minutes, and just building on your points and moving to Heija. I'm curious to get the perspective of Heija, who basically sit pretty upstream in the chain, so has a good sense on a lot of at that stage can be the right battles where there can really be some interesting areas for substitutions.
Yeah, actually building upon what David was just saying, and Anne-Marie as well. I think what we have, we can, of course, I can speak a lot about, providing our sort of industry providing alternatives to fossil materials and circular bioeconomy as a solution to the world's problems. But I think especially what David was describing just a moment ago, I mean, we're talking about a battle which is ultimately it is about a systems change, which derives from the fact that we consume in a way which is not exactly sustainable, and packaging, of course, is often seen as a nasty beast because of littering and leakage to the ocean and all that, and whatever material that is, it is just that we have this kind of with this overconsumption, we also experience a lot of this over packaging, and maybe if there is a battle to choose, it really is to look at this holistically, and of course, we need to reduce, we need to reuse, and we need to replace. So when it comes to plastics, I think I'm not going to be the one judging that plastic is all bad, because I think plastic plays a role, and it's actually a fantastic material in certain applications. And what we really need to think through is for packaging, there is a role that it plays. It is to protect the goods which are in there. coming back to this topic of the COVID-19, I think this is where we've again remembered that packaging actually plays this role. So it creates societal value because it protects us from getting those germs and from those illnesses and the diarrheas of which are plaguing, you know, in the developing world. So this is why we have packaging, and this is why we didn't, you know, like in the old days when we didn't have packaging, or we used just you know, certain containers, for instance, to buy milk fresh and all that, we would often have stomach ache. So I think one thing that I've really seen, and you know, whether it is about bio-based packaging or whatever, but what these past months have shown is that, you know, there may be a lot of regulatory initiatives around which is basically to really kill certain types of packaging, for instance, in food service. And now we've seen that this type of packaging actually has created a lot of value during this this situation where you need hygienic products, and you really can't in whether it is about hospitals or even in any public places, you need this type of tools. And I think it's a good reminder that you know, we need a systems change overall to look at the big picture that is needed. But then in terms of packaging, we also need to remember why we have packaging. And you know, it's not only about the hygiene, it is about and the protecting the goods. It's also about the reducing the food waste and contributing to the, you know, doing its role in the climate debate as well. So I think it's good to bring the debate back and also see that packaging is not all bad, and neither is plastic packaging in particular. It serves a role as well, and yeah, let's be real out there that what are the things that we need and how to improve the situation and just reduce the unwanted impacts of packaging and plastics.
Yeah, just building on what you just shared, I'm just curious, moving on point number 2 about innovative models. If you would share one illustrative area where you think there could be some interesting innovation for the years to come, it could be technology, it could be in terms of management, it could be in terms of policy making, whatever. That would be interesting.
Very good. So I'll combine 2 maybe because you may not know this about my background, but before I became a sustainability expert, I used to be a stockbroker. so actually my entry point to sustainability is through ESG analysis. And I think if there is one big thing which is happening today and which I think will play a key role in redefining sustainability and the future in terms of climate and circular models and all that, I mean, that is sustainable finance. And if I may give credit to a very surprising party in this discussion, it is the European Commission and what they are doing in terms of pushing sustainable finance forward and creating, you know, putting not only in the kind of recovery package and in this frame, but overall bringing it as a tool for change and as a prerequisite for investment in, you know, reducing fossil energy and fossil-based energies and all that. So I think this is really the biggest innovation that we see and the biggest driver that for sustainability that we today should have, not only the kind of the financial sector driving ESG, but the fact that the public sector is embedding that into the way of working and its role in recovery. I think that would be my kind of award-winning solution for the future.
Interesting. As Ksapa is built with a very, very strong background in finance, very traditional finance, I would say, but that's clearly because that's one way forward we strongly believe in to accelerate solutions. And moving to Maria, then I think that would be interesting to get also your perspective on one thing innovative you think can be a game changer for the years to come.
Farid, I'll bounce back on what you just said. Thank you very much. And I need to double check if Sodexo and Stora and Enso are working on packaging. Thank you so much for remembering us that first we need to understand why packaging is important, and very often it increases food life, and so it's important. I would also agree on the fact that for me, finance, I would have said somehow the first initial idea to your question, Farid, was also about the green finance. And Sodexo last year was, to my surprise, I didn't know, I didn't work on that, but was a pioneer last year when we renewed a 1.3 billion revolving credit facility with a few banks and BNP leading it, but to have a pricing adjustment that was linked to Sodexo's performance towards the goal of preventing the 50% food waste. And I think it was a great kicker and a good way for us to share the importance of this battle, the visibility of the battle to ourselves, to our teams, because it's a little bit of hard work to implement those kinds of solutions. Sometimes there is a cost. Yes, you need to implement a balance. You need to every day collect data and define action plans and so on. But there was this kind of financial kicker, which I think it's a very good way of fostering innovative models. I think David spoke a little bit about that. I see an arena where it is so important to work on the education of our consumers on some of the choices. Why take the plastic bottle if you can take from the fountain into your own cup and so on? And I haven't seen much yet fostering this kind of opportunity for consumers to feel that they have their say, their opportunity, and that laziness sometimes and other things shouldn't come into the way. So I would look forward something that really allows consumers, and we do it sometimes, for example, on recycling when we promote bento boxes for people to reuse their little boxes and so on. And it's still so slow to pick up. So I think we have contradiction and some education to do to consumers. And I would love to find some innovations around here about how to change behaviors and how to accelerate the opportunity to work together with the consumers. That would be my
There's not only innovation in that space, but there is also a collaboration needed, which makes a good bridge to the point number 3 and to maybe a perspective from David. We read it a few times about the importance of collaboration moving forward.
Yes, I mean, I think actually some of those innovations you've just heard about also talk to collaboration as well. So I think it's interesting. With another hat I wear, I input from the private sector's perspective to the OECD at their development agenda around the SDGs. And there's a lot of discussion there to the point about sustainable finance, green finance, and creative initiatives around it. And I think whilst they are good, I think there still needs to be a better development of collaboration on the setup of those and the design of those. If I was being perhaps a little bit controversial, they may be more in the favour of the finance providers than they are in the people who are borrowing, even though they may give a slightly preferential rate. And so, you know, I like to sort of put a bit of controversy into the conversation, say they could be better than they are with collaboration to a sort of an end game. I think we also see a lot of collaboration coming through in terms of the value chain, be that sort of upstream in terms of how we can work differently with material providers and indeed material recyclers. I'm particularly excited at the moment about the growth to scale of chemical and to a lesser degree enzymic recycling streams. And so collaboration with the developers of new recycled materials, I think, is critical. And at the same time, collaboration with the collection networks from consumers through the collection work into that recycling stream, I think is also important. Because at that point, we're starting to join up the remaining arc of the circle in that circularity discussion around packaging. And so, creating relationships with consumers to encourage them to recycle, not just through building awareness, but maybe incentivizing that through scanning of QR codes, for example. And there's a great app that helps people to do that by rewarding recycling. Creating collaboration with collection points, particularly in developing economies, where sometimes that is a very informal sector, to get clean waste streams that make recycling simpler, more effective, and to bring those materials for recycling to the likes of those new chemicals recyclers at scale, and so we can close the loop more effectively around it. But in doing so, I think it's also beholden upon us as users of that material to commit to buy from those new recycling networks. I was fortunate to start some work in a previous company in sub-Saharan Africa around this, and we were looking with a number of other global multinational companies, the likes of Nestle, Unilever, Mondelez, amongst others, to establish new setups for recycling of plastic in sub-Saharan Africa in 7 or 8 countries. And what was critical was the support for the market that then came out of it. So collaboration works at a range of levels, both direct as well as indirect in terms of commitment to the market, to help promote that circularity that then comes through. And I think if we can do that, then there is greater opportunity to actually bridge that, the missing arc of the circle that is there. And that's the sort of work I think that as we go forward, companies who are more involved in that will get rewards from it because it simplifies the supply and demand. And if I think back to that Africa situation, at one point it was cheaper to ship virgin plastic to Africa than it was to buy recycled plastic there. And that makes no sense in the long term. And so we need to try and collaborate to change that sort of dynamic in order to make it a scalable and fairly rapidly scalable solution. And that will only happen if companies are prepared to support the development of those markets. And at the same time, to close what is a fairly circular point, the finance providers are also prepared to work in that way. Ori, back to you.
No, very, very insightful. We are running to the far end, unfortunately, of this webinar. I just need to flag that there is a poll, and everyone is welcome to contribute and share views. It takes 10 seconds, really. That should be displayed on your screen. And just moving on, if you need to share any question that you have, there are some contact details that are displayed on the screen. As we speak, the session is recorded. That was one of the questions which came to us, and just wanted to thank you all panelists for your contribution, and maybe just share then a closing word about something that that you've discovered today in discussion with other panelists, and or one takeaway that you think is part of what you will want to explore more going forward. So maybe starting with Heija.
Thanks for it. I was kind of like when David was finishing off, I was thinking of saying hallelujah, because it just sounded like a true invitation for collaboration, and I think that is really like if we live with one message, it is that this is we're all in together, and it's a bit like all for one and one for all, as the Musketeers said. That so we're three here on the call, and looking forward to collaboration post the call, but more across the value chain, of course, but also across the countries and whoever are on the calls as well. I think this collaboration is a good final word for an invitation for everybody.
Maria, any closing word? Something you want to share?
No, very selfishly, I would say that I'd love to just check more about Stora and Enso, and I learned some. Yeah, thank you very much for that. And to just double check how much are we exploring from the wood products. So I'd love to discover more of this. So that's a takeaway for me from this discussion. And thank you as well, David, for sharing this notion that I never thought about of creating the relationship with the consumers, and I insisted so much on the presence of the consumers of Sodexo on our site, but creating some mechanisms of rewarding them with maybe collection points and so on. As you say, digital is here. We've done a lot. We have apps to tell them about the menu. We're always thinking about, should we educate them about the number of calories, maybe one day about the carbon emissions of their dish, but should we think about involving them in circularity and collection? I love the idea. So I'm going to give some work and some ideas for the teams internally. Thank you very much, Farid, for that.
Excellent. Happy for us to be a connector in this regard and for this to be inspiring. David, then luckily you have the closing word, and that actually also is partly because you're on the western part of that conversation in terms of time zone. So you're still in the middle of your day compared to Heija at least. So you can get the closing word.
Well, it means everybody else is going to get to the virtual bar or the virtual restaurant for dinner before I do. So I'm slightly envious. I think years ago when I was doing a lot of work on quality systems, one thing I learned was that things break down at the interface between one department and the next, or between a supplier and a customer. And I think the same is going to be true in the circular economy conversation. So what we've heard today is, I think, three experiences from three people at different points in that value chain. And I think if the opportunity is there to really look at what individually we receive from the person we buy from and how we pass something on to our customer or the consumer, and try and make certain that we manage that interface so that we know that what we pass on can be readily recycled and contribute another arc in the circle that will deliver that circularity in the long term, then I think we'll place ourselves in a better position. And partly that's about collaboration, and partly it's about understanding the point in that circle that we all occupy and how we can act to make certain that the circle is closed by others further down the line.
Thank you very much. So now it's time to close the conversation. To thank you all. And if you have any question, we shared the details, as I mentioned earlier, through LinkedIn. Particularly, you can make sure to connect with each other in terms of participants as you see interest and fit. Thanks for the participation, the webinar, which will be recorded, uploaded. There will be a blog that will be produced out of that as well. And I wish you all an excellent evening, as much as a day for those joining us, particularly from the US. So thank you very much, and have a great rest of the day or evening. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Farid.
Thank you.